I think my starting point is maybe to talk about why law has caused the problem that we're in. One of the biggest problems we have is that in virtually every country in the world, it is the law for corporations to put the interests of their shareholders first. Now, the biggest problem we have there is that that usually means to maximise profit. So there is a direct correlation between what happens in the boardroom level, and it's actually governed by law. So you can actually have someone working within a transnational corporation saying, I'm not totally sure that our energy extractive policies are a good idea because they're causing mass damage and disruption. And that CEO, or that group of directors, will be advised by their lawyer that that may be so, but nevertheless their number one legal duty is to their shareholders, and that means they have to put profit first. It is the law to do this. Now, this is legislation that exists pretty much all across the world, possibly not in one or two countries, but the important thing here is that it's governing transnational corporate activity. Now, this was legislation that was put in place over the last 200 years without looking to the consequences. The interesting thing is that now we know what the consequences are. 100 years ago, when we went down and we drilled for oil and spurted out, nobody thought about the adverse consequences that would have. Certainly nobody really thought how big that energy industry would become and how huge that mass damage and destruction would become as well. So in a way, law has to play catch up with where civilization is with their understanding and their knowledge. And we're recognising that very fast. In fact, we're recognising it because you just have to look around at the mass damage and destruction that's been caused by human activity on a day-to-day level. And we know that that's escalated, and in fact there's evidence out there in various reports. But what is very interesting is that we have closed the door during wartime to mass damage and destruction. And there are parameters of a certain size, duration, impact. But during peacetime, we can do it all the time. Now, what I propose into the United Nations is that we create an international crime of ecocide, environmental genocide, if you will, essentially criminalising mass damage and destruction. And I think this is very important because without creating at an international level an umbrella piece of legislation, we're not going to be able to govern corporate activity at a national level. It needs to be something that supersedes that number one priority, which is putting profit first. And what a law of ecocide does, it shifts that and it says, no, there's now a new number one priority, and that is first do no harm. You have to satisfy the test when you make your decisions in the boardroom. If we decide to do some unconventional tar extraction over here, some fracking over there, some Arctic drilling over there, is that potentially going to cause mass damage and destruction or loss of ecosystems? And if the answer comes back as yes, then it is a crime. And that is very powerful because in the corporate context, what happens is it turns off the flow of money into any activity that is now deemed criminal activity. It imposes a legal duty of care. This is about duties and obligations, responsibilities at a corporate level, but not just at a corporate level, also at a governmental level, because it will suddenly become criminal activity to support and subsidise and prioritise dangerous industrial activity. Instead, what it will do is trigger the green economy by law. It will become law to prioritise activities and business that does not cause mass damage and destruction. But it's more than that. It's about the flow of money. Because this is also about where does our money flow today? A lot of our money is flowing into mass damage and destruction every single day. Directly and indirectly, whether or not it's through investment into unconventional tar extraction, or whether or not it's actually to do with the use of where we put our pension fund investments. Over 1/6 of pension funds here in the UK is financially dependent on what happens in Canada and the Athabasca grasslands, for instance. Many people don't know that. Many people who are actually banking on getting that money in their pension fund will see that that money is actually, there is a link, it's actually coming from very destructive activity. So this is a law that will actually criminalise, will prevent the flow of money going into mass damage and destruction, but also it means that it will no longer become legal to invest in any business activity that causes mass damage and destruction. And what that does is it turns off the tap, it literally turns off the tap to making those businesses financially viable. More than that, shareholders will find it untenable to actually have a company moving forward to something that could be deemed criminal activity. So what you'll find is that this is about creating an international legislative framework that makes the problem into the solution, very much driven by permaculture principles, where you can actually turn a problem into a solution, transcend it. And that's very important. This is about making a legislative framework that makes an energy company turn from being a dirty energy company into a clean energy company. And you do that by setting that law in place and also giving it an appropriate transition period. I was asked by 26 governments to put together a concept paper, a timeline. In fact, we submitted it to all governments right across the world earlier this year, where we were looking at a timeline between now and 2020, running actually from the end of 2014 to 2020, having a 5-year transition period where quite literally you downsize the innovation, the business on one side, you withdraw the subsidies, you withdraw the assistance, the prioritising, and you upsize the other direction, innovation in the other direction. You give the subsidies into the other direction. Somewhere along the line you get the crossover. Now this is doable, of course it's not doable. But in fact this is the biggest job creation scheme for the whole of civilization. It's going to have to mobilise an awful lot of people. We're going to have to skill up people, we're going to have to train. Governments will have to prioritise by law that we start training, that we start investing in research and innovation in the other direction. It's very, very important that we can do this. But this is not about closing down those big corporations. And that's very important too, because we would have economic collapse. It's about empowering and enabling them to actually ensure that we build resilient economies, but economies that are dependent upon the principle of first do no harm. So something what we'll find is the likes of Solarcentury will go really big overnight. And not just Solarcentury, many, many other companies like that will suddenly be able to get quite literally off the ground and fly. And that's huge, that's massively important. Now the interesting thing is that when I proposed this legislation into the United Nations in 2010, and I didn't know then, but now thanks to some magnificent research that's been undertaken by University College London, is that, in fact, the law of ecocide is nothing new. The very first time it was proposed was 1972 at the Stockholm Conference, our first ever big international conference on the environment. In fact, it was opened with a call for that. Over 7,000 people marched on the streets, and within a year, a draft ecocide convention had been drawn up and submitted within the United Nations. Now, it kind of went off the radar for a while, but within the United Nations, we now have documentary evidence of all the meetings that have taken place around this. In the mid-80s, special working groups and what are called special rapporteurs were tasked, lawyers within the United Nations, to draft up a law of ecocide. And what is so remarkable is that at that time, it was decided to codify the existing, what are known as crimes against peace. We already had genocide that was put in place in 1948. We already had crimes against humanity that was put in place in 1948 as well. And we also had war crimes. What was being codified there were those three, and there were another two being added: crimes of aggression, the run-up to war, and ecocide. It was listed there, it was there. Special rapporteurs were tasked for over a period of 11 years to work on this. And in 1996, and we have the minutes, the documented minutes of the meeting, at a closed-door meeting, the head of the working group of environmental crime, international environmental crime, decided to pull Ecocide, remove it completely from the document. Many governments registered their objections. In fact, we know that most governments were going to support this. Had it actually gone to the vote, it would have become an international crime in 1998. Just imagine where we would be now had that law been put in place. Now, this is the interesting thing. It went off the radar, and nobody knew that, except those who were involved, those few hundred, maybe 1,000 people that were involved in that process over those 11 years. This time round, we can put it back in place, and we can do that very fast. All it needs is an amendment to that document. It's called the Rome Statute. We don't have to create a whole new convention or a treaty or what have you. All it needs is an amendment. It just needs 81 heads of state that are signatories to the Rome Statute to make this law. It's a mountain, but it's a small mountain to climb. It's a doable mountain. Even better than that, it only needs one head of state to stand up and call for this amendment, for the door to open, for it to be tabled, for a review to be had, so that then we can vote on it. And I believe that can happen very fast. I'm invited in to talk to governments right across the world about this now. And more governments are really engaging on this at the top level. But there is one message that's now coming through very clearly. For governments to move ahead with this, they need the support of the people. They need the public mandate to be able to stand up and say, we want this, and we call for this amendment, and we will vote for it. They need the public mandate. So what we've done is we've created what we call Wish 20. My wish is that we end all ecocides by 2020. Now, I'm providing the legislative framework as to how we can do that, and the timeline. I know it can be done. Other governments know it. Governments know that it can be done as well. But it depends on not just political will that's driven by the intent of the people. So what we're going to do, and hopefully we're going to start later this coming week, is we're going to map it. We need to be able to show governments across the world, look how many people are supporting this, look how many organisations are coming forward, look how many like-minded organisations support this legislation, because they know that that will stop what they're actually campaigning to stop in any event. This is about one major global collaboration, and I believe we can make that happen. If you go to the website eradicatingecocide.com, you'll see Wish 20, it's up there. Please do join us. Eradicatingecocide.com, or just Google Ecocide. Come on. And you'll see there our Wish 20. It's a global citizens initiative, and this is what we've been talking about earlier, about engaging people at grassroots. It can't be just top down, it has to be bottom up as well. But also, it has to be the bridges in between. Each and every single one of us can be a bridge here. By taking this idea and taking it out into your communities, your networks, and engaging whoever it is that you can reach out to, say, come on, let's support this. This is the legislative framework that can fundamentally be a life changer for all of us, right across the world. So that is my wish, and I do hope you can join me in making that happen. Thank you very much.